Hello, I've played Bodycam on and off since launch, and I've done everything the game has to currently offer. Welcome to my full review. Bodycam is an early access, ultra-realistic, first-person multiplayer shooter being developed and published by Rysod Studios, a team originally made up of only 2 French gamers aged 17 and 20. A good thing to note is Bodycam is allegedly a fast-followed multiplayer version of Unrecord, a game which sparked much controversy and the original idea of an ultra-realistic Bodycam-like shooter. Starting off with the settings, thankfully the audio tab is the first to appear as the game is incredibly loud. There is copyrighted funk music blasting in the menus, and the guns, which are loud in real life by the way, will blow your eardrums at max volume. I am not kidding, I recommend turning down what you need to or you'll become deaf. The voice chat submenu provides the basic options you'd expect, with push-to-talk itself being in a later menu. The video tab is obviously where you'll find all your graphical options. If you're running anything under the recommended hardware, you're going to need to sit here for a bit and figure out what works best for you. I can however recommend running the game on low everything aside from post-processing. Keeping that high as possible will take less out of your system and keep the game nice and crispy. Low to ultra settings have a massive impact on performance, while only visually spawning extra objects to provide its depth. Moving into the controls tab is where you'll find the motion sickness options, which surprisingly I didn't need here, but are incredibly welcome as the game can get pretty intense. As for your keybinds, I recommend immediately coming here after you adjust your audio, as the default binds for swapping are just miserable. Scroll wheel is fine, but binding slots to shifted keys instead of 1, 2, 3s makes no sense to me EEs. This is where you'll also find the push to talk key, but keep in mind, regardless of it being bound, you will always be open mic in lobbies. While I find this a bit silly, it does bring back old halftime CSGO memories and can sometimes be quite hilarious. Push to talk will only work alive in-game or while controlling a drone, allowing everyone in the vicinity to hear you and not just your teammates. There's also basic controller support, which isn't listed on Steam, but is great for those wanting it. However, with how the game plays and feels, keyboard and mouse is strongly recommended unless you truly prefer otherwise. As for the menus, visually they're insanely simplistic and I love the TV VCR vibe. That being said, it does need a lot of work. It's really not a big deal, but I don't always like seeing my friends list on screen, and while there is an option to hide it, it doesn't save while traversing the menus. These censored eyes are also an inspired visual I do quite like. However, with that being said, they can be broken while looking through the shop or wearing any head-like cosmetic. This will bleed into the gameplay, removing it from players randomly, which I don't think is intentional. Now, the one massive issue I wanted to bring up is with these back buttons. More times than not, clicking on them with either click as intended will self-lock my game, putting me in a voided menu with the only escape being to Alt F4. My workaround for this has been pressing escape to leave them instead, however this is a very annoying bug. I've dealt with this since launch and I know others have as well. A fix here would be lovely. With that said, it is also important to remember the game is in early access, so things like this will happen. They've already improved quite a bit and seem to be actually listening to the feedback from the community, which is always a good sign for the future. As for the technical side of things, please note I'm running this off a low to high-end PC, so how this performs for me might not perform the same for you. With that being said, the game requires a minimum RTX 2070 while recommending a 3060. It also requires a fairly decent internet connection, which I'll go more into later. I apparently run this off a lower end card and can comfortably run on Ultra 1080p with around 60 FPS, but will encounter random drops depending on the map being played. The game is currently insanely unoptimized, and even after tweaking all of my settings to perfection, I've had a fair amount of memory leaks, crashes, and random game-related issues. If you happen to suffer with anything mentioned, I recommend messing around with these FS3 settings. They can be annoying to tweak, but provide a night and day difference to frames. You could try copying my settings, however do what works best for you. I know people with newer cards having way more issues than me, while those with lower cards having no issues at all. The game seems to be very hardware dependent, and while there are options that can help, spend your first hour in the training course figuring out if you can actually run it or not. As for the difficulty, being a multiplayer shooter, it will come down to how well you can adapt to the aiming style, pace, and the maps you're playing on. Once you figure those out, it honestly becomes a cakewalk. From what I've seen, the casual player tends to struggle a lot longer due to the game having no skill-based matchmaking. This means you're never placed with a similar skill level and thrown in with a varied mix of players. That said, I've been put in games with top 5 players who barely understand how to function, while little Timmy, who isn't old enough to play the game, is screaming and dropping a casual 30. Take Take that how you will, however I prefer it this way, especially with it being a very casual game. If they were to eventually add a competitive mode, I'd argue skill-based to be implemented, or at the very least make the ranks feel like they matter. It's very hard to rate the difficulty of this game as it varies match to match. Your first game could feel amazing, followed by never standing a chance the next. It's very hard to be consistent, so for the difficulty, I'm going to say it's relatable to that of Team Fortress 2. It's an easy game to grab onto, but quite hard to master. As for the gameplay, in short, Bodycam is a fast-paced, ultra-realistic, multiplayer first-person shooter played in the perspective of a body cam's footage. You control an operator who shoots bad guys to complete archaic objectives in whatever location you're provided. Starting at the not ready screen, you'll have 3 options provided to you. You can host your own lobby, join a server, or hop into a quick play match. I recommend going through the server browser as you'll be able to see exactly what you're getting yourself into and get an idea on how long a lobby has been playing for. Quick play will also just simply slide you into one of these at random anyway. Now I know this will turn a lot of people off, but it's my duty to mention all the servers are currently peer-to-peer. If you don't know what that means, basically you're connecting directly to the host instead of a game's dedicated server. This is why I mentioned earlier decent internet connection will favor you greatly. We're going back to the days when hurting a person's ego or being better than them will cause rage quits, ultimately closing the lobby for everyone. Usually it's quite hilarious until you realize it wastes everyone's time and also hurts your elo if you care about that. Another issue with this is if the host or yourself has a poor connection to one another, you will be randomly kicked back to the main menu without your party. I currently deal with randomly being throttled, and the moment my internet spikes for even a second, I'm immediately kicked to the menu. This is the only game I've had these issues with and would love to see a fix. Once you finally manage to get your boots on the ground, you'll notice you've been given a random loadout. Depending on the game mode you're in, which I'll touch on more later, everybody in the lobby will have the exact same kit and weapon as you. That said, it's entirely possible for your teammates to have a different weapon, however, it too will be given accordingly to the enemy team. Now, unless you're up or down a team player, the matches here are quite fair. The first round of the game will always be pistols, with every follow-up round being quite random. I'm not sure if there is an algorithm it follows, but you won't find any personalized loadouts here. It forces you to be a jack of all trades and utilize your given kits to its full potential rather than always relying on the current meta, which at first I wasn't the biggest fan of, but learned to absolutely love it. Viewing this in a much wanted competitive light, everyone is on a level playing field, and while you do have teammates, the only thing stopping you from being a glass cannon carry is your own mechanical understanding of the game. In other words, you just have to get good. Now the gameplay itself is quite unique. It very much feels exactly how it looks, to say the least. It's like you're grabbing someone's hand with gloves on while constantly moving and trying to teach them how to shoot a gun, one-handed and for the very first time, as they're scared, weak, and praying they'll hit their target. While it's hard to explain, I heavily enjoy this style of aiming, regardless of it being a bit wonky at times. It's very instinctive-like. You're also using the entire screen to aim and move your body versus just having a persistent center point doing all of the work. This coincides with the movement mechanics as they're also a bit weird to explain, as it's very much an experience you have to feel out for yourself. However, you can expect it to be more on the sluggish side as it feels like you're always controlling an average Joe. You can sometimes get tripped up by doors or even being too close to walls. You can crouch and lean like any other shooter, however here it does mess with your aim heavily. They make it quite clear they want you to take a much slower and tactile approach to the combat over the typical run and gun spray and pray style. Truth be told, they both can work with some mechanical understanding, and there is even a fine line between the two that can work flawlessly. While it does have some mixed in realistic elements, it provides a very arcade-like feel across the board, which can absolutely take you a bit to get used to. Now the game is being heavily advertised under a realistic tag with the common assumption of it following simulated gameplay. If you're going in assuming it will be similar to Arma or AFT in any way, you will be severely disappointed. It's a fairly misleading tag, and while there are realistic aspects, it's mostly referring to its photorealistic visuals. That said, a great example of its realism would also be with the ragdoll physics. They're by far the most realistic part of the entire game. More times than not, you really feel for the person you're controlling alongside those you're fighting. Once those bodies start to fall, they do so as you'd expect them to in person. They will slide down terrain, fall over railings, stick to walls, and if you get a killing blow on someone running, you'll watch as their body gets struck down. I was quite shocked at first by how real these ragdolls seemed, and I can see someone who's squeamish of such movements being petrified to play this. Another small detail with the bodies, while in combat, if an operator gets hurt and lives, they will become slower and start limping around due to the pain. If you hurt them badly enough, they'll even start bleeding and leave a dripping trail of blood following their every move until the round is over. I of course love seeing these details and watching how they react with the surroundings after every blow. In-game, of course. There are some dark details here that get pushed to their extremes, and I'm sure some might not enjoy that, but I'm fairly positive we'll start seeing even scarier details in future titles. Now there are currently 4 game modes and 7 maps, not including the training course. The game modes being Gun Game, Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, and Body Bomb. Deathmatch is free-for-all, and Body Bomb is their take on Search and Destroy. They're all pretty much exactly what you'd expect, except in Body Bomb. The T's can plant literally anywhere on the map, by having the randomly given bomb carrier prime it and then drop it down on the floor. Defenders must then find it via loud bright beeping and literally pick it up to defuse it. You'll obviously move slower with it in hand, so you'll want to make sure you're safe before doing so. I thought this little unique twist in the generic format was remarkable. I've never quite played a game mode exactly like it, and knowing the bomb can be somewhere different every round adds an intense level of excitement and replayability, which is why I think Body Bomb could be a perfect contender to slap a competitive rank mode on top of. Yet the only competitive approach the game currently has is a non-seasonal leaderboard, which means it doesn't reset. So if you weren't playing at launch like I was, the only chance you have of grinding up these ranks and reaching within the top 100 is by putting more hours in winning and killing than those currently playing. Which, if you have the time, you could also cheese it a bit quicker by abusing the leaderboard systems put in place, allegedly. I won't mention what could be abused, but if you play the game just a tiny bit, it's painfully obvious. I've never personally done it, but I'd rather see the system fixed than kept in waiting for others to find. It makes climbing the leaderboard even more pointless than it already is. Don't get me wrong, I do like leaderboards, it's just the moment they become an unfair playing field or I'm required to abuse specific systems to climb, I immediately lose all interest and couldn't care less about a silly number. For those of you who do care, I was ranked number 1 on release with pretty much everyone else, and then stayed within the top 100 until I took a break. By the time I came back, thousands were ahead of me, I grinded all the way back up, and then stopped caring again. And this is the rank I'll be leaving the game on. It just doesn't really help the leaderboard is useless and provides no benefit or rewards for hitting any number within its given ranks. It's truly only here to boost fragile egos and prey on those who like when numbers go down. Besides, I think having a pretty rank beside my name over a number is much more satisfying anyway. Moving into the wonderful worlds of Bodycam, as mentioned before, there are currently 7 maps, 8 if we include the testing and shooting range. Splitting them in half, these 4 are outdoorsy, or at least allow you the chance at some fresh air, while these 4 completely lock you away indoors, never to be seen again. Visually, they absolutely nailed the photorealistic aesthetic viewed through the Bodycam lens they were going for. Every map looks and feels incredible, and I don't think anyone will suffer too long to get immersed. While none of the maps are or have destructible objects, the real appeal comes with the randomized weather and night and day cycles. Just like in real life, it becomes a literal nightmare the moment night hits. It becomes pitch black to the point the only lights you'll have are environmental, the muzzle flash of your gun, or a trusty flashlight, all of which everyone else can see and use to their advantage while hunting you down. Now for those of you who are determined not to play a game based on the assets used, I recommend taking 2 seconds of your day to hit subscribe and make this reviewer happy. Anyway, most, if not all the maps are currently reused marketplace assets. While this is not very surprising, they do go out of their way to tweak them enough to fit them in with the Bodycam vibe. Shout out to my boy Ifrus for picking up on the maps I didn't know about. That being said, it really doesn't bother me. Marketplace assets can be extremely helpful to developers when they're used properly. It only becomes sloppy when they're being reused in the exact same way 50 times over. Thankfully, there's enough visual difference here where it feels unique enough to not be problematic. What I do care about, however, is how unbalanced some of these maps are, whether it be the line of sight being too large, small, or the actual balancing system putting you by yourself against 7 others who swap teams for the easy win against you. The spawn points are also pretty terrible unless you're in TDM or Body Bomb, but that's another issue for a later date. As for the actual maps, I think Tumblewood was by far the worst map at launch. However, it was very quickly improved and shrunk down to a fun, suitable size. So Worn House will now take that dirt cake. There are only 2 ways it plays out, fun or miserable. There's no in between. Overall, I've had more miserable games than I have fun, mostly because of this basement. It needs another entry point or taken out entirely for those who sit and cry in it the entire time. I also think giving one full side access to the roof's height advantage at spawn is extremely toxic. As for the best map, the Russian building has to take it, as it's by far the most balanced and sought after map of the entire game. It's pretty much the Dust 2 of Bodycam. You can't really go wrong unless you hate getting stuck in doorways or suck. I don't know. The maps I had the most overall fun in were Oil Rig and the Abandoned Hospital. Both can be played exactly how you like, benefiting all playstyles, while providing extra layers of depth and land rooms to murder in. During the making of this review, they're also currently working on another map and game mode. I'm kind of excited to see how they play out. As for the audio, aside from it being incredibly loud at every chance it gets, I have nothing but positive things to say. The overall attention to detail in the audio department is incredible. The general ambience, footsteps, gunshots, everything. It's insanely immersive, all the way down to hearing the fired shells hit the floor and even roll away. The original soundtrack currently consists of 30 or so copyrighted hard-hitting funk tracks, all of which are perfectly hand-picked and by multiple different artists. I obviously can't play them here without getting DMCA'd, so I heavily recommend searching it up for a great murdering vibe. There were times I caught myself purposely sitting in the menu just to finish a song being played. They're that good. Since it's hard to actually pick my favorite, here's my top 7. Sloppenheimer is such a good name. Now let's talk about an interesting tag called in-app purchases, which is interesting as you cannot currently purchase anything in-game with real-life currency. That being said, there is a shop located within this locker tab, which houses a bunch of cosmetic items that refresh on the daily for a selected amount of R points per item. I like to assume the prices vary depending on cool factor, as the rarity color behind them seem to mean literally nothing. As explained at the bottom, R points are obtained by simply playing the game. You get them after every match completed, with your performance equating to the amount earned. It varies heavily per match, but I can safely say the average is anywhere between 1 to 300. The most I've ever obtained in a single match was around 800. Keeping that noted, you can see the prices of items vary depending on, well, I don't know. The cheapest items I've seen go for 400, which can be obtained in around 1 to 2 games, with the most expensive items reaching up to 5 to 6,000 points, taking around 30 games for the average player. Now, the reason for this unnecessarily long grind comes into play with this next subtext, stating, you can pay R points to save time, but also to support the developers. Heart emoji, which obviously means you'll be able to purchase R points with real money to get the skins you don't want to play for. While this is truly one way to milk your consumers, I don't mind seeing this in free-to-play titles. However, this game is paid for and quite expensive at that. I will say if the paid currency is obtainable in-game forever at this pace, I can't exactly complain as long as the grind is worth it to you, but personally speaking, I don't think any of the current cosmetics are nice or goofy enough to justify spending real-life money on. With how crazy some of these cosmetic prices are now though, I can only imagine how much a bundle of R points will be. I'm all for supporting developers, but the moment you tiptoe into predatory monetization in a paid game, it becomes much harder to take it seriously. There is a lot they could do for cosmetic monetization, some of which not looking nearly as bad as others, but I'm really hoping they take the right path and steer clear of all agreed pulling them in. Hey, you've made it to the story section and my thoughts on it, which is kind of funny because you just clicked on the achievements tab. Or if you've been listening to me talk this entire time, I might have just made you look. Got him! Anyway, the game currently has literally no story unless you can interpret something bizarre from it. I like to believe my operator is being controlled by an alien with a CRT helmet. But as I did not mention before, the game currently has no achievements. With that being said, they were originally looking for ideas in their Discord and of course got flooded. There are truly countless ideas for achievements, and as much as I'd like to see the generic ones tied to maps, wins, kills, yada yada, I would love seeing at least a few harder to obtain ones being tied to Easter eggs or hidden interactables. The backrooms could be a great example, as you had to originally discover it by walking through this door in the shooting range, which could have popped the hidden achievement for becoming lost in the back rooms. Just an idea. Oh, by the way, when the back rooms got removed from existence, it got replaced with these sad rooms, where I can finally roam freely, quite sadly. Hey, if the devs happen to be listening, could you do me a favor? When you ultimately block this off, could you leave a rubber-hosed styled sad face somewhere in view? It could be our very own little Easter egg showing me you watched the video. It'd also just be hilarious, and I would be internally grateful. Anyway, now let's go over some of the positives. Starting with the obvious, the graphics will make you forget what reality looks like. They're absolutely insane. While being perfectly paired with the entire audio department, your ears will be feeling things they've never felt before. The ragdolls are by far the most realistic I've seen in any shooter I've played. It's a fairly cool take on a multiplayer shooter, and it's constantly being updated with maps, game modes, fixes, and more. As for the negatives, there are currently no dedicated servers. The game is heavily unoptimized, requiring a decent PC to run. It's absolutely cluttered with small annoying issues that could potentially crash you often. The leaderboard is quite disappointing and provides no real competitive motive. The cosmetics are quite lackluster and require a decent grind to obtain. And last but not least, the novelty quickly runs out, leaving you an arcade shooter with no real progression. As a neutral I didn't know where to place, it's early access, which means the potential here is quite literally endless until that tag gets removed. The game is currently still in a league of its own, and with enough care and effort put in, I have no doubt it'll keep getting better and become more loved than it already is. It obviously has its issues, with a small team doing their best, but by the time release is reached, I truly hope the finished product is what they want it to be, not just thrown out for another quick follow. In conclusion, Bodycam is advertised as an ultra-realistic first-person multiplayer tech demo to show off the capabilities available through Unreal Engine 5, doing so as a fast-followed arcade-like shooter. Would I recommend it? Well, Bodycam's early access is currently available for 45 Canadian doll hairs or your regional equivalent only on the Steam storefront. Keeping it real, as much as I enjoy playing it, it's very rough to justify the current asking price. I wouldn't recommend picking it up unless it's on a sale or until the game is further along in development and the issues have been ironed out. I will however be keeping my eye on this one as it has unlimited potential I would love to see utilized for its launch. I want nothing but the best, and hopefully you'll see me at launch to perfect all the added achievements and to create another video to see if my opinions have changed. Bodycam. 3 out of 6. I hope I'm wrong. Thank you for watching if you made it this far. Let me know your thoughts down below, or what game I should play for a week next. Subscribe so you never miss a video, and until next time, take care.